A very pleasant good evening to you, everyone. It is Sunday, July 22nd, 2018, about 9:20 p.m. in the Eastern Time Zone. And you are tuned in to episode 14 of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. This is going to be a fun episode tonight, guys. We're looking forward to it. It's been a long week. It's been a rough week. Had some wrestling deaths in the news here that's kind of laid us a little bit low, all sorts of stuff going on right now. So we just want to kind of chill out tonight, have some fun, and talk about one of our favorites. And of course, we can't do that without the curator of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling, co-host, Legends Lover. LL, my dear, how are you tonight?
Doing pretty good.
Of course, we also have the godfather of podcasting, the host of the Shootin Da Breeze podcast, available every Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. He is the one and the only TakersMinion. TM, good buddy, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well. Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here. And how are things in your part of the world there, Biff?
I'm going to tell you something. It's been a hell of a day. It's been a hell of a day, a hell of a week. Been up and down, and that's one reason why I'm looking forward to this show tonight. We want to bring a little bit of joy to your faces out there listening. That's one of the things that I love about this show is that it's not just about the wrestling history. It's about, connections in fandom that stick with us over time. And, TMLL, you could both attest to this. It's, memories of wrestling that you either grew up with or experienced somewhere along the road in life, and that just kind of hangs with you. And it's warm. It's nostalgia. Nostalgia is just such a warm and powerful feeling. It can make you feel really good. Brings a lot of happy memories. And it's weird too when we talk about nostalgia in wrestling, because sometimes we can be nostalgic for people who, in the moment, were, for lack of a better term, utter dicks. And that describes our subject tonight. He played one of the best villains in the history of the business. But at the same time, he was also one of the best baby faces, too. He had a mouth that went 9 million miles an hour. He was absolutely gifted with the jab and gifted with the gift of gab as well. He is a legend in our time, the late, great Roddy Piper. That's the subject of tonight's episode of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. TM, when you look at the totality of Roddy's career, he has to go down as one of the best, I would say. Maybe not in terms of his in-ring work, but in terms of his character, his force of nature, style, personality. Roddy was up there. He's definitely on the Mount Rushmore of wildest characters to ever step inside the square circle.
Yes, he is. For someone who was born in Canada but has Scottish roots, according to his family, he was, like you said, someone who had a gift of jab. He was a solid puncher.
Well, he was also a boxer.
Yes, he was a boxer due to that fact. He was a boxer, judo, black belt in judo. That he was awarded by Gene LaBelle. And also, he was a Golden Gloves boxing champion. So anyone that thought that Roddy was not a tough guy, they found out in the bars later. And this is back in the day when getting into bar fights was expected by promoters.
This is at the time, though, also, if you were a heel, you played a heel, even outside the ring.
Yes.
It was a full life commitment,
That's
basically.
Right. And you figure he had a 42-year ring career.
It's pretty astounding. It's pretty astounding when you look at people who have long careers in the business. There's a general period of transition from the different eras. When we look at the periods in time of the business, its history, from the territorial era to the rise of the national promotions, all the way to the present day. that's a very sharp contrast in the people that are working in the business. People that worked in the 70s did not always make the transition very well into the 80s. People working in the 80s did not always make the transition into the 90s. It was really the special talents that could cross those boundaries. Roddy crossed boundaries constantly, from his start in the business in the territory era all the way through to, the period of time where there was just one national promotion left. We're talking about a huge career filled with important stops all along the way. It's just pretty remarkable to see someone like that have such staying power, especially when you consider that Roddy, his forte was not necessarily his in-ring work. It's one thing if you're like a gifted technical wrestler that can go for years and years. Roddy never got by on his in-ring work. He was very much a character first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
so
he his character work. I mean, if we base Roddy's career on work rate, quote, air quotes here, people, air quotes, work rate, he was terrible by today's standards.
But that's the way he was booked, and that's the way his character was.
Like I said, for his time, in today's times, he would be considered a terrible, piss poor wrestler by a lot of the fans today, because his work rate was, he didn't do a lot of high flying stuff. He was a ground and pound, chin lock guy, reverse chin lock or headlock or arm bar and sell it for 5 minutes type of wrestler.
He was a mat wrestler.
Right.
He was also a mat wrestler.
Mm-hmm. Due to his amateur wrestling from when he was a kid. So, see, a character like Roddy Piper would be placed, and I hate to say this, and this is gonna set off a lot. It's gonna set off some controversy here. Roddy Piper today would be, by fans today, would be put in the same class as a Carmella or Alexa. Great on the mic, but sucks in the ring.
But
wow.
That's what you get when you get.
Tell me I'm wrong, Biff. Tell me I'm wrong, and then give me reasons why I'm wrong.
Mat wrestlers and brawlers today, they would suck. Look what they do to Natalia. Natalia is a mat wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody says she sucks.
Taker, for future reference, if you're going to blindside me with a verbal low blow like that, give me a warning that it's coming, because I didn't know how to process that at first. It's a very interesting way of putting it, but I'm not saying you're wrong. It's
true. It's the truth.
It probably is true, but
and it's no disrespect to Roddy. I'm not doing it as a disrespectful thing towards Roddy.
I know you're not.
I loved Roddy. I mean, he was great. I loved his matches. He was someone that really never wanted to be a champion. He could care less about titles and belts. He just wanted to go out and perform.
He wanted to go out and beat the shit out of people.
Yeah, he wanted to beat the shit out of people.
But for somebody that never wanted to be a champion, he held 34 championships.
Would it be fair to say that Roddy, and this is going to be kind of interesting. I'm trying to figure out the best way to put this, maybe. Roddy much more resembled a Terry Funk type of wrestler who, while he could do some things in the ring, Roddy was not, we're not talking that Roddy was a complete incompetent. That wouldn't be fair. Roddy could wrestle when he needed to. But like Terry Funk, who could also wrestle when he needed to, Roddy allowed the character to kind of sell the matches, and he didn't have to do as much because of the character. Terry Funk was like that a lot too. He relied on his force of nature, personality, that just larger than life persona that Terry Funk had. Roddy Piper maybe even more so with the character, especially as he got, a little bit more established in the business. it's just a different time period. He didn't have to do what some of the wrestlers today are doing. And honestly, while we talk about what Roddy would be today in terms of his place in the business, you know, I think the reverse is true too. We look at people like Seth Rollins or Finn Balor or even Roman Reigns to an extent. We look at what they're doing today and where they're at on the card. If you reversed it and put them, you know, 20, 30 years ago, given their personality, their character, their mic skills, I wouldn't guarantee that they would have a lot of success either. It's just a different era.
Yeah. That's what made Roddy Roddy. He was able to cross over. I mean, his in-ring career started in 1969. Okay? Deep, thick times during the territory era.
That's pretty much the apex of the territories, really.
Yep. I never saw him live in Chicago. I don't know if he ever did anything with AWA or not.
He did a little bit, not a lot.
No. He was working mainly in Canada the first 5 to 6 years of his career. So
he worked in Kansas, Hollywood.
Yeah, he worked in LA. He worked in LA for Gene LaBelle. Go figure.
He had wars with the Guerreros.
Oh, yes. Yes, that is absolutely a good point to bring up, because this is interesting. And this kind of speaks larger, or I should say, it speaks more to kind of the mystery that surrounds Roddy Piper. Now, I don't want to suggest that Roddy was just like an enigma or something, but Roddy definitely has a certain unique place in the wrestling business, especially in the, you know, collective memory of the fans. There's not a lot of people that know kind of, you know, Roddy Piper's story, and especially in terms of his early career and being brought up, you know, into the business. Not many people know much about Piper in terms of where he came from. You know, I would wager, you know, a lot of people probably didn't know he was Canadian. I mean, unless, you know, you actually listen to him talk in interviews. His father was a Mountie, an actual Mountie. And,
who had a drinking problem and was abusive.
Yeah, and Piper had to leave home early. What do you say, Piper? His real name, Roderick Toombs. But, you know, yeah, he had to leave home. He basically was on his own from an early age. And so, you know, you're talking about someone that had to pretty much toughen up and survive, kind of like Harley Race had to from an early age. And it's the people that have to go through those types of ordeals that generally wind up becoming real tough SOBs later in life. And Piper was absolutely one of the toughest guys in the business.
Well, when he left home, he hung out at a lot of the gyms. He was like Bobby Heenan. When Bobby Heenan dropped out of school, he was at the wrestling rings. Roddy Piper was the same way.
Well, Roddy didn't drop out of school.
No.
He was expelled. He was expelled for carrying a switchblade.
Yeah. But when he left home, what I'm saying is, he hung out at the rings.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely, it's one of those deals where, you know, he kind of got absorbed into the business because he hung out around wrestlers. That was not that uncommon. That's how a lot of people broke in, especially in the territory era when wrestling was more localized, I think, than it would be. As far as Roddy goes, and in terms of his actual in-ring career, you could really break it down into 3 major components. There is the early days, which not many people know about. And there's a reason for that, which we can get into here in a moment. But really, his career when he was doing shots in Canada, when he was also working out on the West Coast. He was very big in California. He was very big in Portland for Don Owen in Portland wrestling. That's really the first kind of era of his career. But then he also had a very prominent run in the U.S. Southeast, in Georgia and Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling in particular. And, of course, that's right in my wheelhouse. I know a lot about that particular era. But once he gets into the WWF in 1984, that really sparks the third and final era of his career, which is, international superstar. Up until this point, Roddy Piper was a wrestling star. He was very, very much known in the business as a great talker, a good brawler. When he goes to the WWF, he becomes an international celebrity. He really transcends the traditional mold of a wrestling star, and he becomes kind of a pop culture icon, honestly. I mean, if you're talking about the wrestlers that made the leap from the business to pop culture consciousness in the 80s, you have Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Andre the Giant, Ric Flair, and then Roddy Piper fits right in that same group. And you might have Dusty Rhodes, but after that, the list kind of dries up. Roddy is very much in that classification of someone who is known by casual fans, hardcore fans, and non-fans alike. That says a lot about your ability to convey your importance in the wrestling ring. He was a larger-than-life star in a body and frame that was not larger than life. He looked like he could have been anybody walking down the street. But my God, he made you feel like he was something special when you saw him in the ring. It's just a remarkable charisma and presence about him. If you saw him wrestle, you knew you were looking at someone special.
Yeah. Well, you're forgetting one territory, or should say, he was at WCW. Because he was in WCW for a while too.
Well, yeah, but
this was late in his career though, and I'll say this now, looking back on it, yeah, it was cool and all that he was with WCW and against the NWO, but they made a mockery of him.
Well, too, he was already a world-renowned star by the point he got to WCW, because he was also in TNA, and he came back to the WWE even after the Monday Night War had ended. So he definitely had a career that went past the WWF. I didn't mean to imply that. I just meant that by the time he gets to the WWF in 1984, he becomes a superstar, and from 84 on, wherever he goes in the business, he's pretty much known as one of the all-time great superstars in the business.
Yes. I'll say that. I'll agree to that. I mean...
Yeah, because Ric Flair even says he's the most gifted entertainer in the history of professional wrestling.
Ric Flair and Roddy Piper had a very close relationship. They were very good friends. If you've ever read Ric Flair's autobiography, he talks pretty glowingly about Roddy Piper. And outside of Wahoo McDaniel, there might not be anyone that Ric Flair was closer to in the business other than Arn.
And Dusty, for that matter.
Yeah, it's, now...
Dusty and Rick were close, as were Rick and Ricky.
Yeah. Wow, you're talking about some of the great names we just rattled off right there, just off the cuff.
Oh, yeah.
But it's weird too. That's another interesting thing about Roddy. In the 70s and the 80s, particularly, you had people, stars in the business, that could transition between the AWA, the NWA, and the WWF. But
uh-oh.
Excuse me for just 1 second.
You all right?
Oh, the danger of live podcasting, folks.
Yeah, that's the great thing about it.
Yeah, I was about to make a point and a bug flew down my throat.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's what I get for leaving the windows open. Okay, excuse me. um, uh, yeah, sorry about that. I wasn't expecting a little gnat to go down my throat like that. Um,
That
but
time
anyway, yeah, we're definitely in the summer doldrums here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Roddy was interesting. You had people that could transition between the promotions, but there were a lot of people, a lot of wrestling stars in that era generally stayed within the confines of the promotion that they worked for. In other words, if you were a major star in the AWA, you generally stayed in the sphere of the AWA's influence. If you were an NWA guy, you generally stayed in the NWA territories. If you were known in the WWF, generally speaking, you stayed in the Northeast. You know, it's like you could move around a little bit, and you did see some of the biggest stars move around, but it was very rare for a performer to kind of cross boundaries like Roddy Piper did. Roddy went out on the West Coast, which in the 70s and especially the early 80s was kind of no man's land in the NWA. He was able to cross the country and go into really the hotbed of the NWA in the early 80s with Georgia and Mid Atlantic. He crosses into New York right as the national expansion begins, and then he goes into WCW in 96 at the height of the Monday Night Wars. He just has the ability, Roddy Piper does, of crossing these boundaries at will. And that's really a gift reserved only for the biggest and the brightest in the business.
Yeah.
You have to have a certain level of cachet, a certain, reputation to be able to do that and to do it successfully too. We're not talking about a job guy that was bouncing back and forth looking for work here. Piper is moving from company to company, and he's wrestling in main events. Okay. A lot of people that don't know Roddy's pre-1984 career with the WWF might be shocked to know Roddy Piper was the semi-main event, essentially, of the very first Starrcade. That was the second most featured match on that entire card. The dog collar match.
Wasn't that the dog collar? Yeah, the dog collar match with Valentine. Yeah,
and one of the bloodiest matches in wrestling history. One of the sickest matches too. It's kind of interesting. We talk about that. We just saw Randy Orton tear on Jeff Hardy's ear on SmackDown this past week. This is the patron saint of bloody-eared matches. Piper lost some hearing in his ear as a result of this match. So he was renowned wherever he went. Roddy Piper didn't have to become a top-level wrestler in the WWF. He was already a top-level wrestler coming in. That's why Vince put so much faith in him so early on. He just made the leap from main event wrestler to international star in the WWF. But we're talking about someone who had a very rich, very diverse career before he got to the WWF. And I think that's an era of wrestling that people would really be interested in learning more about, because there's some great stuff in Roddy's career early on.
Yeah. I'm sitting here looking through the information on him, and it's just like, ugh.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. There is a lot.
Well, you figured he owned his own name, too. And he got Piper by a mistake, because when he first started wrestling, he came out with guys playing the bagpipes. And one of the announcers couldn't remember what he was called, so he called him Roddy the Piper. And that's where Roddy Piper was born. He owns his name. So that, he taught himself how to play the bagpipes. I mean, he is so versatile in everything.
Yeah, he taught himself how to play the bagpipe. He taught, if you ever on a WWE network, if you ever look up Legends House, Roddy Piper is on it, and him and I think most of the times it was him and Gene Okerlund were always out past curfew doing something.
And Jim Duggan, yeah.
Huh?
And Jim Duggan, too.
Yeah. But at the end of most every show, there would be Roddy sitting at the stand-up piano playing Now the Time Has Come on the piano at the end of most every show. Roddy Piper taught himself how to play the piano.
He's kind of the definition, I would think, of a polymath almost. He was so versatile, he could do pretty much anything you wanted him to do. Of course, the track record, and it's a little bit different to talk about this now as opposed to 10 years ago. When you have guys like The Rock and Batista making bukus of money in Hollywood, John Cena is starting to make the transition. He's had some success. For a long time, wrestlers in Hollywood were not, a surefire thing. Hulk Hogan never really recovered or never really matched performance in Rocky III, which was essentially a glorified cameo, basically, for as long as he was in Rocky III, and that was pretty much the height of his acting career. Wrestlers, they did not do well for a long time in Hollywood. Roddy Piper, up until The Rock, was probably the best actor of the bunch. He definitely had the most success of anyone that went into acting from wrestling, I would suggest, both in terms of qualitative success and in terms of commercial success.
What was his famous line in that movie, They Live?
I have come to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I am all out of bubblegum. One of the great lines in science fiction history. That movie is so freaking good. If you've never seen They Live, it is amazing.
It is great. I loved it.
Yeah, that was one of John Carpenter's best of the 80s, and that is high praise given some of the other movies he had that decade.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a cult classic today. That I would not be one bit surprised, and I'm not saying this would be, a sick person or anything, but I would not be one bit surprised that if on Roddy's tombstone, wherever he's at, it says that, because that line, I mean, he used so many different variants of it after that movie that it was, during the NWO time, that line to a point came out. When he was running fighting the NWO, he had a way of taking something that made him an international superstar, which was what that movie did. That was his jumping off point. And he was young then.
I just had a thought that come to my mind, and I want to get your opinion on it, because I never thought of it until just now when we were talking about this. But now that I'm thinking on it, it really feels like it's so apropos. Roddy Piper is the Robin Williams of wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we're taking They Live, now he had other films. He never quite matched They Live in terms of box office success or credibility. But if you're looking at They Live, okay, Roddy, when he goes into the store and he's got the glasses, I'm not going to spoil the movie if you've never seen it, but the way he's just throwing off one-liners, it's just so natural, and it's so frantic, and there's a very Robin Williams style quality, and you see this especially in his WWF run post 87 when he turns babyface, especially 89, 90. There's like this frantic, manic energy where Roddy could just rattle off a one-liner on a moment's notice, and it made me realize that Robin Williams kind of had that same mentality in comedy. Mm-hmm. Roddy Piper has a very Robin Williams style quality about him in the wrestling business, and you see a little bit of that in They Live. But if you've never seen the movie, definitely check it out. I don't know if it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime. You may have to go to a video store to find it. Those mythical ancient creatures that are becoming extinct. It's worth the effort to go out of your way to find.
Hell, if you can't find it at a video store, then go on Amazon on the internet or eBay, I'm sure you'll be able to find it there.
Yeah, it's a cult classic, great movie. Can't recommend. We'll have to do a film offshoot one of these days, a Connoisseurs film room or whatever. That's definitely going to get a recommendation. But definitely check that out. Just don't watch it with young children. It is very much a movie for mature viewers. I'll just say that ending especially. You know, there's a little bit of risque language and a little bit of risque imagery in there, but it's great. So check out They Live, highest recommendation.
But like I said, that line, I'm here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. I don't know how many times I heard that during the NWO era when and I would sit there going, I would hear that and I would go, damn, that's a good line. Damn, that's a good line. Then I found out it was in this movie, and I'm like, well, son of a bitch. You know, it applied so well to that whole storyline.
It did. It really did. And I think that's, one of the unsung values of his WCW run. The matches themselves were not that great, especially in the context of an era when you have on your own brand the cruiserweights in WCW that are revolutionizing in-ring work. And then in the WWF, you have Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart on top. It's the ring work was definitely archaic by that point in WCW, but the promos were still very good. Roddy never lost his ability to talk. He was always a great promo. He always had the ability to capture interest. And especially as he got older, Roddy very much became kind of a sympathetic figure in the business because you knew that Roddy cared about the business. He had a passion for it, and he cared about the people in it. The famous story where what was the man's name that directed The Wrestler? Darren. I can never pronounce his last name. Aronofsky. Darren Aronofsky, I think his last name is.
Okay.
The man that directed The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. For those of you who are smarter than I can pronounce that name. He basically collapsed into the guy's arms crying because he was so emotional at seeing the story told. And then it wasn't that Roddy just loved the movie so much. It was Roddy knew that Randy Duran Robinson as a character represented so many people he knew in the business that struggled like that after the star had faded. And, that was just the kind of guy Roddy Piper was. He was a very sympathetic, a very emotional guy, a very relatable person, a very fun person. But at the same time, it was, the exact opposite in the 80s and the 70s for much of his career. Roddy Piper, you would not have found many people expressing a great love or admiration for Roddy Piper amongst the fan base in 1980, 1981. Or even 84, 85 in the WWF. Roddy Piper was one of the most hated people in wrestling because he was that deal. As we start to break down his career in the wrestling business, we're going to see the sharp contrast between Roddy Piper as somebody that you would go to war with and you just love unconditionally, and the Roddy Piper that you just wanted to hit with a brick and just put him in the grave, That Roddy had the ability to draw out that much emotion no matter what character he was playing. And that's especially prevalent in the early part of his career. LL, you brought it up earlier when he had a very memorable feud with the Guerreros. This was in an era where he was getting death threats because he was using some very, shall we say, questionable promo material. That's a very nice way of saying he was using racist material. Different era. I'm not saying he was racist. I'm just saying, wearing sombreros and carrying mariachis down to the ring to torment the Guerrero family.
Well, like he was supposed to go down and play the Mexican national anthem on the bagpipes. That was a condition he agreed to. But what he did is he came in playing La Cucaracha.
And caused a freaking riot.
And it caused a riot.
What?
This was-
I have a question. I have a
Era.
question. I have a question here, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a question here, and I want to see you guys hear you guys answer on this. Today we see signs at shows. If so and so don't win, we riot. Okay.
Yeah.
And so doesn't win, and there is no riot. What has happened? I mean, look at it. The 60s and 70s and into the early 80s. A riot at a wrestling show was commonplace for one reason or another. Why is that not so common now? Not that I'm giving the universe ideas, but
I think it's twofold. I think there's two reasons for that. The first reason, and probably the biggest reason, is the death of kayfabe. People going to the shows today more than any other era of the business, at least in my opinion, know that they're going to something that is scripted. The match results are predetermined.
Yeah.
And it takes away a big emotional component. And you can see this in other aspects of the business. And I've always said this. Look at a Jim Crockett crowd from 1985 or 86 when you have the Rock and Roll Express come out. And compare that in 1998, 1999 with the Hardy Boys coming out. There is a lot of emotion in both crowds, but it's a different type of emotion.
right.
The crowd in 85, this is that phrase I used a minute ago, they're going to war with the Rock and Roll Express. Rock and Roll Express are basically their avatars, and when the heels do something to the Rock and Roll Express, they're going to basically beat the crap out of the heels because they're all in the fight together. In 98, 99, at this point, wrestling, the curtain has kind of been drawn back a little bit. You have people who are angry, fiery, but you also have the mix of people that are there just to see people get their head bashed in with chairs or jump off of ladders. There's this sort of mentality where, okay, wrestling's not on the up and up, so let's just see people crash and burn in these car wreck matches. And that mentality kind of morphed into what we have today, where people come to the shows and they want to see, high impact wrestling. They want to see good matches, but they're not as invested in the individual performers. They may like certain people, like Daniel Bryan has a legion of fans, Seth Rollins has his fans, but that's just it. They're fans. And the old school wrestlers were something different. The fandom was much more personal, was much deeper. And plus, too, the second component that I was going to bring up, there's a higher preponderance of families coming to these wrestling shows. Back in the day, wrestling was not often, it certainly wasn't marketed to children, and it wasn't really focused on children. It was very much something that older people enjoyed. That's one of the products.
Mostly the men.
Yeah.
It was mostly men.
Yeah, I mean, mostly men, but you did have some women that come. I mean, my grandmother, she hated Blackjack Mulligan. My great grandmother.
Well, yeah, you had women that came, but it was more geared to the men.
Right, and you see that in the product, because what is the hallmark of wrestling in the 70s and the 80s, especially? Violent, brutal, usually a lot of, blood, a lot of, brutality in the angles. Dusty Rhodes and the...
But also some that you said earlier, too. That before, it was more believable. You had the faces stayed with the faces. The heels stayed with the heels. That's how they hung out. That's how they lived. Nowadays, you get them all mixed up as friends outside.
Yeah.
So you got that difference, too.
The best way I've ever heard it put is, and I can't even remember who put it this way, but it was so perfect an analogy. In the 80s, especially in the early 80s of the territory era before the WWF went national. Wrestling was wrestling. It was choreographed violence. It was a fight. You went to the fights.
Bobby Heenan, he said that in one of his interviews. At the time, you lived it. Wrestling was wrestling. You lived it. That's like when they said a riot with Roddy Piper. He was shot at. People went after him. Look at Bobby Heenan. He got shot at because of what he was. Yep. Nowadays, you don't got that shit.
No, it's a different mentality. Today is like a variety show. It's a circus mentality. You go to see the different acts, the different styles of wrestlers. You may have some that are more popular than others, but it's a variety show. It's basically the Carol Burnett show mixed with sports entertainment. Yeah. You get a little bit of comedy, you get a little bit of action. It's just a hodgepodge of things, but nobody takes it too seriously. And I'm not saying, and I'm sure Taker would agree with this, we're not saying that the riots were always a good thing, because people getting shot at is obviously, a pretty mortifying experience. Junkyard Dog and, Michael Hayes, famous example. Michael Hayes has told the story many a time about almost being shot in New Orleans, I believe it was, during an angle where they had blinded the Junkyard Dog, and they were going to attack the Junkyard Dog, who had accompanied the babyfaces down to the ringside. And, of course, the crowd is freaking out because they think the Junkyard Dog can't see, and the Freebirds are going to attack him, and they're going to kill him. And so a fan jumps over the barricade with a loaded pistol and takes aim at Michael Hayes. And he's like, "Don't worry, dog, I got him." And Junkyard Dog had told Bill Watts after the fact, he's like, "I was really conflicted of what to do, because I could, disarm the guy and prove that I could see, and Bill Watts would kill me, or I could let the guy shoot Michael Hayes to keep the angle alive." So, I mean, it's like, on the one hand, the riots and everything, that wasn't necessarily good, but it was indicative of a passion for the business, and that is the tragedy, I think. Comparing Roddy's era to the modern era, that passion is lost. Yeah. The fans don't care as much as they used to.
It's not just the passion is lost. The believability factor is gone. Like you said, wrestling was more wrestling then. Even though it was scripted and entertainment then, people believed it was more wrestling. Where now it's just entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why when I made the statement that I did and asked the question that I stated, I put the disclaimer on it, not that I am giving anyone in the universe ideas, because I do not condone violence. I do not condone, although the violence in the ring is not what it once was, and there are parts of me that wishes it was back. I do not condone fan violence. And occasionally we still have a fan or two on occasion jump the rail. It's happened. I mean, not the plant, not Ronda Rousey jumping the rail, but I'm saying the actual fan who believes it's somewhat real and does that. But I'm not condoning any type of action of that type.
No, but you're looking at the older days where it was believable. People really believed these feuds were going on. They believed everybody hated each other.
Because one of the things, like you said, is that they lived the gimmick 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And you'll get on one of the interviews, you'll have Bobby Heenan on there, you'll have Roddy Piper, and Mean Gene Okerlund. All three of them are on there. And they said you lived it. If you were a heel, you could not be seen out in public with the face. You were literally fined. You got fined for it.
Oh, look at the controversy that happened with Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik.
Yep.
Riding together, they were riding together in a car. Got pulled over. And they got caught for possession of I think it was cocaine, marijuana, and open containers in the car.
And you got a face.
And those two were working an angle at that time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Different time.
Different time. I think we could talk about all sorts of those incidents, like Ken Patera, and gosh, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it Masa Saito with him?
Yes. Speaking of which,
The late Masa Saito, who just passed away this week. They had another incident like that.
Yeah, where they threw a boulder through a plate glass window at a McDonald's in Waukesha, Wisconsin.
I'll never forget Mick Foley's description, and they proceeded to start kicking some ass.
But it's the thing is like you had the heels they hung out when they had a feud. They kept it going inside and outside the ring, personal lives. They had to.
Well,
nowadays they don't.
That's what that right there, and that is, and Roddy Piper was like this. And Jim Cornette is still like this, and this is why, even though Jim Cornette and I, our political views are as opposite as can be, and our religious views and everything, I respect Jim Cornette and his opinions on the importance of taking wrestling seriously for this reason. Jim Cornette is the poster child for all of the wrestlers that came in through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the early 80s.
Kind of like me.
Well, it's like when you get into the business in that era, you are expected to live the gimmick 24/7. If you're out in public, you got to be in gimmick. You don't associate with the faces if you're a bad guy. You don't associate with the bad guys if you're a face. You keep the business sacrosanct. You protect the integrity of the product 24/7. Because if you didn't, you were out of a job. And if you did it really badly, you were blackballed from the business, period.
Yep.
And so Jim Cornette, it's not that I'm not saying wrestling didn't need to evolve in some aspects. It could, because it did. But when you see Jim Cornette complain about people not taking the business seriously, I can respect that viewpoint, because here's somebody that if he didn't treat the business with respect, he had no livelihood. He would have lost his livelihood if he had done what some people are doing today. And so I understand that mindset. Roddy Piper was the same way. Roddy Piper, more than almost any other wrestler from that era, was a tremendous advocate for other wrestlers. Roddy Piper would go to bat for other wrestlers more than almost any other star. And that was true from his earliest days in California and Oregon, right through to Georgia and the Carolinas, and especially in the WWF and beyond. Roddy Piper was very much in the Jesse Ventura mold, someone that was going to go to bat for other wrestlers, because Roddy Piper had a deep intrinsic respect for the business and what it meant. Mm-hmm. And that is a trait that not all superstars show. That's not something you don't hear people talk in such glowing terms about Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan like that. They talk about Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan being great for business, but when they talk about Roddy Piper, it's not just, he was great for business, but he was a great friend of the business. He's like a Mick Foley type. Mick Foley has done a lot of work with wrestlers since he retired. He's always given, respect to people. He never looks down on people. He treats everybody with respect, and it's just the mentality. When you give your body to the business, you want to protect others in it, because firsthand the physical demands.
Well, prime example, you're talking about Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, and great performer, great in the business, but not great for the business, which is code speak for somewhat selfish.
Yeah, just a little.
It was all about me, is what these two guys were. Especially with Hogan.
Yeah.
Rick, not so much. He's giving back now. But let's take a look at something here. This is a slight segue, because you mentioned earlier Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart being near the top, being on the top in WWF.
Yeah.
During the time that we were talking about it, Shawn Michaels was very selfish, self-centered, and narcissistic, egomaniacal bastard. That's a known fact. That's come out. Shawn himself has said it. After he left because of his back injuries and all that stuff and was gone, what, 3 years?
From
2, 3
98
years?
to 2002, 3 or 4 years, yeah.
Yeah.
He had a cane.
When he came back, he was cleaned up. He was off the drugs. He was off the booze. He, had gotten himself right. He was a different person.
But he also had to earn all the respect and everything.
He had to earn everybody's respect, which he did over time.
And it took a while.
And look at what he's doing now. He's giving back to the business with the kids down at. He's moved his family from their ranch in Texas. So I believe he still has it. I don't know if he sold it or not. Down to Florida, down to Orlando, and he's working at the Performance Center gratis, as far as I know, for free. Why? Because he wants to give back. He feels he has to give back now. There's someone that has completely changed the way he's thought of, or the way he was thought of in the business, as an egomaniacal, narcissistic bastard. He is now one of the most loving and caring guys, and he's teaching the kids today what is good for you and what is not good for you. Yeah. And what works in today's times and what don't.
Yeah, that is something, and Jake Roberts mentioned something recently in an interview that really stuck out to me. When you see the older wrestlers comment on today's product, a lot of people mistake that for bitterness or anger towards modern wrestlers. It's not bitterness or anger coming from a lot of these guys. It's just that experience talking, the knowledge that some performers today may lack because they haven't been in the business as long and because the business has changed so much. There is a certain desire and a certain point with a lot of these guys that care about the business to look out for the people in it. And I'm not disparaging Hulk Hogan as a person. We all know he's had his problems and the things that have gone on in his life. Hulk Hogan was a businessman. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. He made a lot of money. He made a lot of money for the people he worked with. He made a lot of money for the companies he worked for. That's fine. Ric Flair, same way. Businessman. Made a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with making money in the wrestling business. But not everyone has the mentality to look out not only for themselves, but for other people as well. Wrestling as an institute, as a career, can be a very solitary, very lonely existence. Not only are you on the road all the time, but there's always the implication you need to be on the ball and really, giving your best, because if you aren't entertaining the fans, the company that you work for will find somebody that will. Mm-hmm. And so, especially in the old days, it's not so much the current atmosphere, which we can argue the merits of, the lack thereof. In the old days, you had to work as hard as you could to entertain the fans because it was very much based on merit. You got over and you were given a chance to succeed. If you didn't, you failed, and that was that. And so, you always had the mentality of people going into business for themselves. It was very rife among the top stars. Wrestling was very political during the territory era. And so for someone like Roddy Piper, who came up in that territory era, to really, come to the understanding that, hey, this is a fraternity, we have to protect one another, that's not something that people at Roddy's level often felt. Because I don't remember hearing many stories about Randy Savage going out of his way to help other people. No. I don't remember hearing The Ultimate Warrior. I don't remember hearing Hulk Hogan stories. Ric Flair, Vader. Vader might have been the exception to an extent, but
when you talk about Randy Savage, he was a lot like the Heartbreak Kid used to be, egotistical
and narcissistic.
Yeah, he was.
Well, Randy was batshit crazy. Let's call it. Let's be honest here. Randy Savage was. There is a sharp. Maybe I should rephrase that. There is a very thin line between Randy Savage the character and Randy Savage the person. I love Randy Savage. I'm not knocking Randy Savage. He's one of my all-time greats. But Randy Savage was definitely living the life. Very much the character and the real-life person were very much similar. Let's just put it that way.
Yes, they were.
Except in his last few years, he changed.
Right. And that's, as wrestlers get older, they either become very bitter. I think of a superstar, Billy Graham, who's kind of become very cold-hearted and very callous. Tammy Sitch, valet in the 90s, she kind of became cold-hearted. And then you have the Roddy Pipers and the McFoleys who, tend to be more open towards other wrestlers. Terry Funk always looking to help other wrestlers.
Oh, yeah. Terry Funk. Terry Funk.
Yeah.
In ECW. Oh, I can make him. Oh, I can do something special with him.
Yeah. That's,
he's telling Paul Heyman this. Okay.
Like you're talking about Billy Graham, to this day, he's still a bitter man.
Yeah.
He has sent his ring. He has sent his Hall of Fame ring back, and he wants out.
Billy Graham.
The stuff with Ronda Rousey in there, he is one that is against her using the name, wearing that jacket, everything. He says that she is ruining the legacy of Roddy Piper.
Yeah, Billy Graham can shut the hell up. That's my official response to that.
Well,
bitterness that's gone on.
And remember this, ladies and gentlemen, remember this. Ronda Rousey spoke with Roddy Piper about using the name Rowdy.
Gene LaBelle brought those two together. He actually got Roddy to come to one of Ronda's matches. She didn't know he was going to be there.
Have either of y'all seen the WWE 2K19 commercial with Ronda? They actually have. I don't know if y'all seen it or not. I'm guessing you might not have. One of the commercials for the upcoming video game has Ronda Rousey in the locker room getting prepared to go out, and it actually has a conversation, kind of like a voiceover with Roddy Piper talking to Ronda.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it too.
Oh my God, that is such a great commercial. Whoever made that commercial, kudos to you. That was great.
Because what they did, they actually did have that conversation.
Yeah.
Gene LaBelle brought them together. And he gave her the right to use that name. He was honored.
Yep.
And then when she made her debut at WrestleMania 34.
Right before the match.
Or no, at Royal Rumble, I should say. Roddy's son delivered Roddy's jacket to her.
That is Roddy's actual jacket.
That jacket she's wearing at Royal Rumble is Roddy's jacket. She's got her own now, similar style and everything. But that jacket she was wearing when she walked out on stage
for the first time.
For the very first time is Roddy Piper's jacket given to her by Roddy's son.
There was no bigger fan of Ronda Rousey while he was alive than Roddy Piper.
He loved her. He loved her.
Yeah.
He said to her, "You're doing something special."
Yeah.
And for Roddy to give his blessing, that's all she needed.
Well, he said it in the commercial. You're doing something so special, and I love you for it.
And basically, they took excerpts of interviews that he'd done over time about her. And put that together, and that's what makes it so good.
And what's funny is when Ronda first got into that, her hero was always Roddy Piper.
Yeah,
they were both trained by the same person.
How important is Gene LaBelle to wrestling history?
Very.
And that you figure, and that introduction that Gene did with the two of them was the best thing that ever happened to Ronda.
Yeah, so
it was a surprise, but it was the best thing. She loved it.
Yeah, so the people that are accusing Ronda of diminishing Roddy Piper's legacy, shut up. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. You're stupid. You're idiots. Go away. That's all I have to say to you. I'm so sick of the anti-Ronda people bringing that up because you're talking out your ass. Roddy Piper gave Ronda his blessing, and Ronda is not diminishing his legacy one bit. If anything,
she's making it stronger.
She's making it stronger because it's through her that new fans today are going to go back and experience Roddy Piper. They're going to want to know why she calls herself Rowdy. They're going to want to know about the namesake.
Yeah,
and that's what we're here for. We're here to provide that link for people that may not know about Roddy Piper because he was damn good at his job, and you can shut up talking about all this crap about Ronda Rousey diminishing his legacy. You don't know what the hell you're talking about.
And anyone who says that Ronda can't cut a promo,
shut your mouth. Just
she can. Have you guys ever heard her talk prior to her UFC fights? Those off the cuff. She is good. Give her a little bit more leash, WWE. Give her bullet points and have her go out and talk. I guarantee you, she will sell. She will put an ass every 18-inch. Every 18 inches.
You want to hear something else? That commercial that you're talking about. Not only is it building Ronda up, it's keeping it's also keeping Roddy alive for people.
Yeah. And you know what? And we're gonna, here on the show, we're gonna talk here in just a moment about some of the great memories of Roddy and his career, and some of the highlights of what Roddy Piper brought to the table.
My favorite is Piper's Pit. That was the best show.
We might as well segue right into that because Roddy Piper.
Forget Miss TV, Jericho, and all that other. Nothing can beat Piper's Pit.
Nope.
Well, it was the forerunner. That's pretty much what started the trend, I think.
And that started, if I'm not mistaken, in 1988.
No. This is back in 84 or 85-ish.
Oh, yeah, 84.
84 it started, yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of the reasons that he actually started Piper's Pit was because of the injury that he sustained in the last month with Greg Valentine in the dog collar match. It was actually, people used to think that was kayfabe. He actually did lose like 50% of his hearing, I think. I got 50 to 70% of his hearing in his left ear. He ruptured that eardrum, which, you don't blaze your ear, people. He was bleeding buckets out of his ear during that match because they were beating the piss out of each other. So while he was recovering from that, they gave him an interview segment called Piper's Pit, and
it was a hit.
That was
one of the most famous Piper's Pits. And I can still see it happening to this day.
Jimmy Snuka
with the coconut.
Yep.
Roddy thought he had killed Jimmy with the coconut strike.
To the day he died, he regretted that.
Yeah, well, have you ever gotten hit by a coconut before?
No, and I don't particularly want to either.
They're not pleasant. They're hard. They hurt.
Have you been hit by a coconut?
Yeah, I got hit in the head by my ex-wife at the grocery store. And as a matter of fact, we were talking about this very freaking subject. And she's like, that couldn't have hurt that bad. And she tossed a coconut at my head in the grocery store.
Ouch.
Yeah, it sucked.
Like I said, that's something I don't want to experience. And Roddy felt that he may have given Snuka brain damage because he was never the same person after that.
Well,
Snuka changed after that whole thing.
Well, that's
could have been drug related. We don't know.
We don't know. But that was a legendary moment, and you can hear the thud of the coconut smashing. Okay?
Yes,
it wasn't gimmicked, which is part of the problem. And so he gave a shoot interview, Roddy Piper did years later, where he said that he saw the whites of Snuka's eyes, like his eyes rolled back in his head because he got hit so hard. But
what about the one he did with Cyndi Lauper when he busted her album?
Over Captain Lou's head, yep.
Yep.
That was it. Excuse me. That was in Madison Square Garden in the ring.
That was hilarious.
That was one of the kind of build up to WrestleMania. We talked last week about the WrestleMania Saturday Night's Main Event connection with the WWF national expansion, and might be a good point to bring up, Piper's involvement and all that, because of all the people involved in the main event at WrestleMania, you could argue that the most important person in the ring that night was Roddy Piper, because you have to have a great antagonist for your heroes to fight against.
Yeah.
And that's, something that we should really talk about here. For Piper's first 2 years in the WWF, in 84, 85, and through the first part of 86, he was the top villain in the company. And that says a lot when you consider Roddy Piper was not a big man. He was not muscular. He was not like a bodybuilder size, and he wasn't a big giant. I think, he might have been 6'1", maybe. 215 to 230 pounds in that range. So he's not a big man.
6'2", 230.
Yeah, compared to someone like Hulk Hogan, who's got rippling muscles, he doesn't look like a physical match, but he was still treated and taken seriously as a top heel because he was just such a devious wrestler in the ring.
And his mouth. People don't understand it. You could be fight dirty, you could do all that stuff, but it's the mouth that gets you the most.
Roddy has so many memorable one-liners from his heel run. You could rattle them off just off the top of your head. You don't throw rocks at a man holding a machine gun. I could beat you with one arm tied behind my back. Vince McMahon on Tuesday Night Titans one time, he's like, how low can you go in terms of class? And Roddy just kind of laughs at him, and he's like, well, I came on your show, didn't I? It's just a mile a minute. You look at any of his Piper's Pit segments, some of the more famous ones, of course. He was talking with Andre the Giant. He was trying to butter Andre up, and Andre basically lifts him up by his shirt with one hand, and Piper's flailing, and that set up a match at Madison Square Garden, a very famous match where Dr. D. David Schultz and Roddy Piper bloodied Andre. Andre was taken to the back, and he came marching out, wrapped up like the mummy, and he just proceeded to raise some hell in the ring. And that's just what Piper did. Piper taught people into the building, whether it was wrestling a job guy like Frankie Williams, or whether it was a main eventer like Hulk Hogan, or a celebrity like Mr. T. Roddy Piper.
Mr. T, the celebrity one. The thing is that wasn't all scripted. Roddy did not like having celebrities come into the ring.
That was part of his protecting the business.
Yeah, he did not like that. He even said it, Mr. T did not belong.
Yeah.
So the antagonism there was real.
But I'm going to tell you something, and I don't know if y'all know this story or not. This was actually captured in one of the WrestleMania history books that I used to own. It's not a very widely known story. Despite his animosity towards Mr. T and the way Mr. T would act, Piper was probably one of the single most important people in terms of the promotion of the first two WrestleManias in getting T ready. And the famous story is actually from WrestleMania 2, where they were going to do a weigh-in for the boxing match. If you're familiar at all with WrestleMania 2, it was taped in 3 locations. And
New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the Nassau Coliseum in Long Island, New York. They had the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago and the LA Sports Arena out in Los Angeles. And Roddy Piper and Mr. T were the main event of the New York segment, which was the first segment. They just went east to west during the show. So they're anchoring the New York segment of WrestleMania 2 with the boxing match. And as part of the boxing match, they had a weigh-in scheduled. It was interesting because one of the young up-and-coming boxers at this weigh-in who hadn't yet made a big name for himself nationally was one Mike Tyson. That gives you an idea of how far back we're going here. So this is February, March of 86-ish. WWF had assumed that because Mr. T would be there and Roddy Piper, that there would be a lot of press covering the weigh-in. But the word had not leaked out, and nobody knew that they were there, and so none of the press showed up. And Mr. T was having a real problem doing public relations stuff without the press being there. He wanted all the cameras, and he didn't want to do anything if nobody was there. Well, Roddy Piper knew that the WWF cameras were there, and they were going to film the angle for television. So Roddy had to psych Mr. T up like there were hundreds and hundreds of cameramen in the room waiting for them. Roddy was told by the agent working the little angle they were shooting that nobody was there. So Roddy took it upon himself to psych Mr. T up like there were thousands of people in the room. And Mr. T walks into the room, and he sees that nobody's there, and he's kind of flabbergasted. He's like, what the hell's going on? And Roddy Piper comes in behind him, and he just starts raising Cain. He just starts going nuts, like there's 1,000 people in the room. And Piper is just going nuts. He's just going all at it. You know, Mr. T's people in Roddy's camp, they all kind of get into a little shoving match for the cameras that the WWF had brought. And that was Roddy's genius. Roddy could take a lemon of a situation and make lemonade out of it. He was always ready on the spur of the moment to just crank up the intensity to 11 and salvage what, in theory, should not have worked. There's no reason, there's no discernible reason in 2018 why Frankie Williams, God bless him, should be known by old school wrestling fans. But he's known because of Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper could take a know-nothing segment on a random episode of Wrestling All-Stars or Championship Wrestling, whatever the hell it was back in that day. There's no reason that Frankie Williams should be known today as the guy that lost to Roddy Piper with one arm tied behind his back. But Roddy Piper just had a gift of gab. The ability to talk people in the building to see the most outlandish of matches. He got a gate out of Frankie frickin' Williams. The quintessential Northeastern job guy. He got a gate out of it.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. And I'm going to bring up a name of someone that, you know, is currently on the ballot on the Final Four ballot for the Connoisseurs fan choice.
I'll give an update on the voting here at the end of the show on that very subject.
But Dusty Rhodes was another one that could sell seats. Had the gift of gab.
Yep.
He was a face.
Yep.
Roddy was the heel that could do this. Roddy Piper was the Dusty Rhodes of heels. He could sell seats.
Yeah.
He loved the job.
Huh?
He loved, like he was talking about with that thing with Mr. T, Roddy loved the job so much.
Yeah.
Not so much he loved the job, he loved the business.
It was a passion.
He had the passion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a passion for the business. That's what allowed Roddy to be so great. And it's interesting, too. This is one of the first times that I can remember this happening. There is a phenomenon in wrestling, and if you watch wrestling long enough, you'll know exactly what I'm about to talk about. Sometimes the greatest baby faces in wrestling start out as great heels. And they are so good as heels that they turn themselves babyface.
I have a great example.
Well, Roddy Piper is...
Roddy Piper is one of them, but I have another one.
Go for it.
How about The Undertaker and Paul Bearer?
Yeah, exactly.
The face turn for Undertaker was him saving Elizabeth's face.
Or what about Braun Strowman?
Yes.
Yeah, Braun Strowman. Braun Strowman is an example. Steve Austin that might be one of the greatest examples. He came in as a heel in 95, 96.
As the frickin' ringmaster.
And then he became Stone Cold Steve Austin, and within 2 years, he was selling a T-shirt somewhere in the world every 5 seconds.
You figure Undertaker, Braun Strowman, Roddy Piper, Stone Cold Steve Austin. It was all organic. They never changed the way they did things.
No.
Yeah.
But they were loved. They got face pops because they're that loved.
Hell, how about the Road Warriors?
Oh,
yeah, the Road Warriors are a perfect example from the NWA and then the AWA too for a time.
Think about it. You think about it. The hence the nickname, the Road Warrior Pop.
The Road Warrior Pop, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, there's a certain gravitas with the great heel wrestlers where you just kind of morph into loving them. Randy Savage was a psychotic heel in '86. And by the fall of '87, he was part of the Mega Powers with Hulk Hogan, one of the biggest money-drawing angles of all time.
Well, that was all because of the reuniting with Elizabeth.
Well, no, Elizabeth had been with him. It's the reuniting of Elizabeth in '91.
Yeah, it's time to wake me up.
We got hulked. But as far as Roddy Piper goes, I mean, Roddy.
Oh Jesus! Now we just got Stone Cold. That's enough.
I think LL got happy with the theme songs there for a second there.
Well, it was like me doing doo 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 yesterday.
Oh Lord, if you haven't yet. Okay, now we got Shinsuke Nakamura. But no, Roddy Piper is just like the Macho Man. He's just like the Undertaker. He's just like Steve Austin. He got so good. That's okay. He got so good at his job as a heel that fans started cheering for him. And by the summer of 1986, he had pretty much turned himself babyface, which was a remarkable feat given how much of a heel he was in '85 and '84. Mm-hmm. But that's something that Piper did frequently in his career. We didn't get a chance to talk much about his run in Georgia Championship Wrestling. He had a very similar incident in Georgia where he kind of turned face, kind of on the spur of the moment. He was a heel when he came in, and he was a commentator with Gordon Solie, which if you ever listen to Bruce Pritchard, this is one of the reasons why Roddy became a commentator in the WWF in 1990, 1991, was based on his commentary work in Georgia Championship Wrestling. But he was a heel in Georgia, and people didn't realize that he could wrestle too, because he had been wrestling out in California and he'd been wrestling in Oregon for Don Owen with Portland Wrestling, but those tapes weren't widely available in the Southeast during this period of time, so people just kind of thought he was a commentator. And he basically saved Gordon Solie from, I believe it was Don Morocco, I want to say. Don Morocco was working in Georgia at the time, and Morocco was on just a rampage. And, you know, he was about to beat the crap out of Gordon Solie, and Gordon Solie was like the dean of wrestling announcers. You don't lay a finger on Gordon Solie. On the Mount Rushmore of classic babyface ring announcers, Gordon Solie, Lance Russell, and Gorilla Monsoon are all up there. But, you know, he didn't want to have Gordon Solie get attacked, and so Roddy Piper attacks Don Morocco, and he becomes a huge babyface. And, you know, all through his Mid-Atlantic run, he would have variations where he would slip into heeldom or become a face. He was one of the biggest baby faces in Mid-Atlantic in '83 when he wrestled Greg Valentine, which we'll talk a little bit about the dog collar match and surrounding that before we wrap up. But he had a habit of being so good at his job that he turned himself babyface. Yep. And he did it again in '86, and he never turned heel again in WWF until years later when he came back in 2003. So
yeah, I know.
that was
I don't. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I reviewed that pay-per-view match on another podcast Friday night, and we reviewed that whole pay-per-view, and
his best days were behind him. Let's say.
in my opinion of that pay-per-view is this.
Shouldn't happen.
No, the creative involved in that entire pay-per-view, and it seemed, and I said this, and I'll say it again, I even said it yesterday, is that they put the 2018 creative crew that is we got now for Raw, SmackDown, and the pay-per-views in a Wayback Machine and sent them back to 2003. There weren't very many good matches on it. That pay-per-view from 2003, Judgment Day, was a C- D+ match pay-per-view. It was horrible. Roddy and Hulk Hogan, aka Mr. America, better known as Mr. America at that time, had a match. And ladies and gentlemen, I've said this on other shows, and I'm going to say it here. It was a match that happened.
It was the real match made in hell.
Or should we say it's a match that shouldn't have happened?
Yes, I would agree with that. Roddy was way past his prime at that point. Roddy could barely move. They had to have a lot of interference by, I can't remember the guy's name now, on the outside. Sean O'Hare, yeah. Sean O'Hare had to interfere several times to protect Roddy because Roddy just couldn't go anymore.
Yeah,
and he was a young man at that point. He was a young man.
Well, Roddy, a lot of people don't realize how beat up Roddy Piper was. I mean, even in the early 90s.
Well, he had hip surgery. He had a hip replacement surgery already.
Yeah.
When he went to WCW.
Yeah, I think they covered for it with the motorcycle accident on WWF TV, but that's why Roddy stopped wrestling for a period of time in 90 and 91, and he kind of transitioned into the commentary booth. He didn't really start wrestling again until 92. And even at that point, he was only wrestling for a few months. So He was really, worn out from wrestling over the last 20 years because, like you said, he started in 69. And by 87, he was already thinking of retiring because of injuries that had been piling up. But, he definitely did hang around for a long time after. And thankfully, I don't feel like he really diminished his legacy all that much by the 2003 run. He had better guest shots later on. But, Piper's career up until 96, 97 was so memorable in and of itself that really and truly his star was always going to shine through, I think. Mm-hmm. And especially, when you're talking about 88 and 89, 89, he wasn't around 88, but, in 1989 and 1990, Roddy Piper probably was one of the most beloved wrestlers in the company. I mean, on Primetime Wrestling, there was a reason that Roddy Piper joined the cast of Primetime Wrestling in 1989. He was the babyface foil to Bobby Heenan. It was the camel box because Gorilla was playing the middleman in between them. Still as a babyface, obviously. Gorilla was never going to be a heel. It's just not possible at that point in his career. But, it was, Bobby Heenan and Roddy Piper were just going back and forth. Those were some of my favorite episodes of Primetime Wrestling in 89.
Oh, yeah.
Piper and Heenan, you talk about two great ones. I mean, woof.
I don't remember what year it was, but I seen it. It's when Randy Orton and his father.
Oh, yeah.
Bob Orton and Roddy Piper were good friends. And all of a sudden they were talking with Roddy Piper in the ring. And Bob Orton and they attacked Roddy right in the ring. beat the shit out of him.
Had to have been 2005, 2006 during the Legend Killer gimmick, I think.
I think it was.
The Legend. October, November of 2005.
Yeah.
Because that's when Bob turned on Roddy Piper and Randy went after him.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. We have about 15 minutes left here on this show. And, of course, Roddy's career there's too much to cover in one episode.
Oh, yeah. We might have to go a second episode here in the very near future.
Yeah, we're going to have to. I mean, you could break it down so much. I mean, we've only been skimming the surface of his career.
But that's our job.
No, it is. It is. As you know, we're going to give you a taste of the wrestling goodness and let you dive in. And I thought one of the things we should do here is talk about some of his our favorite matches of Roddy Piper, because even though he didn't have the classic in-ring work of a Ric Flair or Nick Bockwinkel, he had some memorable matches, and I thought it'd be a good chance to bring out some of our favorites. LL, do you have any particular match that really stands out when you think of Roddy Piper?
No, I just love seeing him in the ring. I don't have any that really stand out. A lot of the things that stand out for me are his Piper's Pit.
The interview segments.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. I mean, they were memorable in their own right. Taker, do you have any matches that stand out in your mind?
The series, it's not so much one match. It's a series of matches that he had with Bret Hart. With the WWF title at the time.
Yes.
Oh, those Intercontinental title matches.
Or the Intercontinental, yeah. The double underhook off the second rope that Bret Hart.
The sleeper reversal thing.
Yeah, the double pin where Piper gets his arm up at the count of three, but Bret Hart's shoulders are down, and Bret Hart thinks he wins, and it's actually Piper who won because Bret Hart's shoulders were down. I will never forget that ending. That is a classic ending.
You know what we should say, since you're bringing up about Roddy Piper and Bret Hart? What people don't know is that Roddy Piper also trained
at the
Hart's dungeon.
Yeah, there was a family connection there, I do believe. They were like cousins at some point, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Or at least they had the strong family ties between the Toombs family and the Hart family in Canada.
He was really close with the Hart family.
Yeah, and that match at WrestleMania 8, the kind of the blow off to the Piper Hart feud over the Intercontinental title, that's one of the great stories, I think. And it kills me that I can't remember who brought this up, because they did it in such a great way, and I don't want to rob from them. If I remember who put it this way, I'll try to give them credit. But someone had talked about the match and being such a great story, and it's so true, about Roddy trying to fight against his base instincts to cheat and to steal because he knew that Bret Hart was a better wrestler than him. And the frustration you could see building up with Roddy throughout the match. And at the end, where he's about to hit Bret Hart with the ring bell and he's having this crisis of conscience in the ring. That's glorious storytelling.
Yes.
That's wrestling 101. That is what made us fans. That is so lacking today. That just internal struggle over a character that we've fallen in love with over the last 5 or 6 years. That you see him, he's slipping back to the dark side. You don't want to lose him. He's struggling, and all of a sudden, at the end of the day, he makes the decision not to lose himself. And yeah, it cost him the match, and it cost him the title. But he goes out with his head held high, knowing that he lost to the better man. That is freaking great story.
And one of that, and to top it off, I believe the referee was Hebner.
Earl Hebner,
yeah. And Earl Hebner had the belt in his hand and was going to give it to Bret. And Roddy snatched it out of Hebner's hands. Walked over and handed the belt to Brett.
Helped him put it on, too.
And helped him put it on. You don't see that today.
No.
Like they
That was saying, you're the better man. And they shook hands, and Brett raised Roddy's hand.
They walked out together, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, they did. They walked out together, arm in arm.
Yeah.
But you also think of this. How we always say, where they work together in a match. They know how people wrestle and how you work together. Those were two that could work together. They trained together and everything. Those two were good together.
Yeah.
They knew each other. They were that era's Steamboat and Flair. They were WWE's, WWF at the time, Steamboat and Flair.
In terms of the story of the ring, yeah.
The story in the ring and the work in the ring.
They were great matches. Yeah.
They had so much trust in one another.
Where everything flowed.
Yeah.
Because they knew what each other was going to do. Because they could work together. That's trust.
Yeah. That would be probably his best match, I would say, of his career.
It was a series of them. I think there were 2 or 3. Can't remember.
Yeah, the WrestleMania 8 blow-off is what everybody kind of gravitates toward, with good reason. It's one of the best matches in WrestleMania 8, and WrestleMania 8 is criminally underrated today. It's one of the best WrestleManias of that era.
Also, he had his series of matches with Adrian Adonis.
Oh, God.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I was literally about to go there. Adrian Adonis. That's the storyline that made him a mega face in '86 when he attacked Adrian Adonis's set with a baseball bat, and Morocco and Orton, who Don Morocco not quite as much, but Bob Orton in the '80s was kind of Roddy Piper's manager almost. He was a sidekick. Yeah, there you go. He was a sidekick. He would go everywhere with them. You know, Ace Cowboy Bob Orton and Roddy Piper were kind of a tandem. And another one of his favorite lines at WrestleMania 2, if he lost to Mr. T, he probably would give up women and tiddlywinks, but he would never give up Ace Cowboy Bob Orton.
Yeah.
He to kiss on his cheeks. So. Roddy's
We got a few minutes left here. Why don't we talk about something that is interesting when it comes to Roddy?
Well, I want to stick with the matches for just a second. I know where you want to go with it, but I want to talk a little bit about the match with Adonis and the feud, because it's really one of the biggest parts of his WWF career.
No.
We also need to talk a little bit about his NWA run too, because he had some legendary work with Ric Flair that played back into Ric Flair's return to the WWF in '91. One of Ric Flair's first big rivalries in the WWF when he came to New York after the whole fiasco with Jim Herd and WCW was with Roddy Piper. And they really played off their history in the business together. Well, that history was formed in Mid-Atlantic in '81 '82, where Roddy and Rick had some hellacious wars over the U.S. heavyweight title. And, of course, this was right around the period when Ric Flair would become world heavyweight champion. That bled into the feud with Greg Valentine, who used to be a tag team partner with Roddy Piper. That's where the dog collar match came at the first Starrcade, which is available, children, on the WWE Network. If you want to see one of those brutal matches you'll ever see, Starrcade '83. That is actual blood. He didn't blade his ear. He actually burst his eardrum in the match. And so that's all legit. That's a legit injury that you're seeing in that match. So one of the great brawls of that era, the dog collar match. But we get into '86. We got to set the table here for the people that don't know about this storyline. LL, you brought up Piper's Pit and how it was so revolutionary at the time. And what that did was basically gave Vince McMahon a chance to spin off other talking segments similar to Piper's Pit. Jake Roberts had his own segment called The Snake Pit. Jesse Ventura had one called The Body Shop. And it was all kind of building off the success of Piper's Pit. You had these different shows pop up. Well, Piper goes away due to injury for a little while in '86. And while he's gone, there is a new talking segment that's introduced on the same set that Piper's Pit was filmed on, called The Flower Shop. And it was helmed by Adrian Adonis. Now, Taker, we should probably talk a little bit about the Adrian Adonis character, because the Adrian Adonis that started in the AWA is not the Adrian Adonis that we're talking about in '86.
No. Big differences.
Let's talk a little bit about Adrian here, because I think we really have to kind of lay out the groundwork, because this becomes important later on with where we wanted to go with Roddy too. So,
yeah, Adrian Adonis was not always blonde. Did not always wear the pink. Adrian Adonis is actually a black-haired, had black hair, was built rather well. At his time in WWF, he had put on a lot of weight, gotten fat.
He got punished for that, basically.
Yes, he did, and that's where they came up with the how's a nice way to put it?
The adorable Adrian.
Exotic Adrian. Was that exotic?
Exotic Adrian Street was the template for adorable Adrian Adonis.
Right. I knew it was. I knew that. Yeah, and
basically,
ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to be as politically correct as I can here, but basically, what they did with Adrian Adonis is they made him into like a gay wrestler.
Yeah, which at this point it was very much still taboo. But he played it to a hilt, but it was definitely drawing on.
He was
really
Goldust before Goldust was gold. He was Goldust before Dustin Rhodes was Goldust.
Yes, it was very controversial for the era. So,
and
but
I think part of the reason why, and I'll say this, and it's never been public.
It's weird to talk about, because even though it was drawing on some really offensive stereotypes, especially by today's standards, it was one of the most interesting characters in the WWF in that stretch in '86. I mean, he got over huge as a heel. And that's why Roddy Piper wanted to work with him. Roddy and Adrian were good friends, very, very good friends. And this was the catalyst that basically turned Roddy Piper permanently a face, was the flower shop angle where Roddy gets beat up and they injure his leg, and he comes back with a baseball bat and just beats the crap out of the set. And that started the war with Roddy Piper and Adrian Adonis. And it culminated in the haircut match at WrestleMania 3, which is another one of those memorable matches that you should look up on the network. But this ties into kind of what you wanted to talk about. I know we're running out of time, so we can kind of get into that real quick. But Adrian and Roddy were good friends. And unfortunately, of course, Adrian Adonis passed away in a car wreck a couple of months after WrestleMania 3. I can't remember if it was 87
or 88.
Went over a cliff,
an on-guard-railed cliff.
Yeah, up in Canada. He was kind of making a comeback at the time, and he unfortunately lost his life in a car accident.
Well, I think it was up in Nova Scotia, if I'm not mistaken.
Nova Scotia or Newfoundland, one of those eastern provinces, I think. You're right. Yeah. So, but that death really hit Roddy hard.
Unfortunately, we need to take this home because I've got to get ready for work. We're going to have to do another episode on Roddy. We just don't have the time.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. We are running out of time. Okay. Well, like you said, we're going to have another episode here in the very near future. Probably in August, we'll pick this back up and we'll just continue on, because we got so much more to cover with his later WWF run, his WCW run still. And some of the stuff that happened post wrestling for Roddy. So be on the lookout for that. Let's get some plugs in right quick. Wanted to give you an update. Of course, we've been doing the fan selection series of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling Hall of Fame. We are down to the final 4. That ballot is up. It's available at Cage Side Seats. We'll have a link in the ad thread for this show. Over at Cage Side Seats. If you haven't already voted, please be sure to do so. At last check, the Nature Boy Ric Flair leading the way with 51% of the vote. Macho Man Randy Savage and Steve Austin are in a dogfight for second at 24% and 20% respectively. Dusty Rhodes kind of trailing behind at 6%, but we still got some time left. That vote will continue on until the end of the month. So you still have another week and a half or so to get your vote in on that. Of course, we love to throw some plugs to some of the other great shows out there. We like to hit up the Cage-Side Seats affiliated podcasts with the Better Boys Club, Brent Brookhouse and Ethan Page. Not Your Demographic with Stunning Stella and Enigma Aaron. Keeping Up with Kayfabe, Mark Riley, Jody May Esquire, and Jack King. And, of course, Bros Before Elbows with Anthony Farron and Tommy. We, of course, have a ton of podcasts that are not affiliated with Cage-Side Seats that we like to give some love to. Two Guys, One Sport with Crazy Chris Colgan and our friend George Curtin-Jerker at Savas. Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling with William Fitzpatrick. We have the Violet Wrestling Podcast with Ambrose Alley and Prince Moxley Lopez. And, of course, Ambrose Alley has her new podcast, Ambrose Alley's Ramblings, that drops every week now. We have Match Fixin' with our friend Don Sal Cusmano on Cedar Bridge Media. Be sure to give Don Sal a little bit of love. Wednesday Night Shootin' with Tanya Rogers and Andrew M. Swift. We have Ringside Geeks and For the Love of Wrestling with Miss Monroe and Friends. The Ruthless Aggression Podcast, Full Metal Matt does this show every week on Friday. Of course, Taker guested this past week. I've done a few guest shots on that show. Some good stuff coming from Metal Matt. Something to Wrestle With, Conrad Thompson and Bruce Pritchard. Great podcast. Conrad also has What Happened When with Tony Schiavone, another good podcast. Give Conrad shows some love. Jason Solomon, The Solomon Monster Sounds Off, drops every Sunday. Be sure to give that show some love. And, of course, we cannot forget the Godfathers' pride and joy, the Shootin Da Breeze podcast. Drops every week, 11 a.m. Saturdays, 10 a.m. Eastern on the weekends of the big four shows.
Yeah.
I got you, buddy. I got you.
Okay.
LL, where can they find you during the week?
You can find me at Windstorm64 at Twitter. Sorry, my voice is gone.
Oh, that's all good. We have the contact information in the doobly-doo, as John Green was saying, the info box down below, too. Taker, where they get you at, bud?
You can find me always on Twitter at Takers_Minion. You can find me on the nightly and the daily pretty regularly. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be making my triumphant return back to the nightly tonight because the sumo from Nagoya is finished.
Mitaki-Yumi
won the tournament at 13-2. On a sad note, though, they had one of the wrestlers from the second division, Jurio. His mother passed away. That was Gagamaru. His mother passed away during the tournament. They also had a moment of silence for all those that were killed in the floods over in Japan. So our hearts and thoughts are with them.
Yes.
Okay, Biff, take us home.
You can find me at Cage-Side Seats daily and nightly. Be bringing you all the good content of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling in the weeks to come. Again, be sure to vote in the fan selection series Final Four ballot over at Cage-Side Seats. We'll have a link in the advert thread for this show. Give us a like. Pound that thumbs up button if you like what you hear. Subscribe. We got all sorts of great content in our archives. For LL and TakersMinion, I am Biff Kensington. This is episode 14 of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. We'll be getting up Hot Rod again in August. Next week, you want to be here. If you like tag team wrestling, by God, you're going to love next week's episode. We got a good one for you. Pound that like button. Subscribe. Be happy. Be merry. Be excellent to one another. We'll see you next week. The Connoisseurs of Wrestling. Take care, guys. Oh, and Adam Rice, your sports team still sucks.